Hey, um, my name is Dr. Eunice Menja, and I'm excited to take you through this course again. Cultural diversity, if this is your first time to attend my courses. This course, I have to say, I have about 13 years of experience in teaching courses that are related to developmental psychology, human sciences subjects, and as well as cultural diversity, personality development. I do have extensive skills and experience working with patients of substance abuse and other mental disorders. I hold a PhD in community resource management, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist that is working under supervision in Oklahoma, meaning I am licensed in the state of Oklahoma as a marriage and family therapist, but I have to work under supervision for about 3,000 hours, which um, almost 2 years. Um, Before I worked in the Department of Human Services and Family Sciences as a specialist, and I've also worked in child welfare also as a specialist, especially in foster care. And I've held many other positions, especially teaching in Kenya, in the US. So my background is quite huge, especially when it comes to mental health. So I am glad. I am also an author. I have published 3 books selling on Amazon. So that's I want to say that I am grateful for you to be listening to my training or my teaching. Thank you for coming to my YouTube channel. So if you like this video, please like. You can comment, and you can also leave me a subscription. I would appreciate that. So if you're in my class, make sure that you are taking notes because definitely I will ask questions based on what has been taught in class. Okay. So before, obviously, that we go into why cultural diversity, I wanted to actually tell you a little bit about culture shock. So culture shock, people experience culture shock, especially when you move into a different town, different city. You might have left your home and gone, traveled to school or college or university, and you start to experience culture shock because it is something that you have never been exposed to. When I moved to the United States, there were very, very many culture shocks. And if I had to share them up to now, I've been in the US for 20 years, but I'm still experiencing culture shock because you never stop learning about new culture. So things that you don't know you, they will shock you because everybody have their own different way of doing things. So have you ever eaten something that you didn't know what you're eating? Because you went to somebody's house and they provided you a meal, but you just ate it because you probably didn't want to ask what they were eating, but because you were hungry and somebody provided you a plate, you just ate it. So you never know what you ate. Maybe you are eating snails, maybe you are eating um, other things. So um, have you ever tried to shake people's hands and they bowed instead? Or maybe they just put their hands in the pocket. And I'm not talking about COVID during COVID and after COVID when people couldn't shake hands. I'm literally saying you tried to shake somebody's hands and they bowed instead because that's how they greet each other. So that's culture shock. It shocks you that that person bowed to you instead of giving their hand. Um, so, have you ever used a phrase that accidentally offended someone? Well, let me give you an example. When I came to the United States, I used to hear the word silly most of the times. So people here, when they say that you're funny, they use the word silly. They will say you are silly. And so I remember one time when I went back to Kenya the first time, and I told my father-in-law that he's silly instead of telling him that he's funny. That really was offensive, and I had to explain to him that the word silly doesn't mean that you're stupid, in America. So something like that. Or maybe you got lost because you couldn't be able to read the signs because maybe they were written in Spanish or they were in Swahili and you can't read them because you don't know Swahili. Um, have you ever misunderstood somebody's culture? Maybe your girlfriend, maybe your husband, maybe your wife, maybe the people that you live with on campus. There are very, very many culture shocks, and that's the reason why um, diversity is taught. It is not only taught in mental or medical health because it is important in all aspects of life. Cultural diversity impacts every aspect of healthcare. So I'm imagining that most of my students that are going to be listening to these slides or this presentation, they're probably doing occupational therapy, others are doing counseling, others are doing just medical in general or mental health. So whatever it is, cultural diversity does impact every aspect of our healthcare or mental health. Patients from different backgrounds will have different perspectives on their health. Remember, it is on their health, on their illnesses, and we're supposed to have patient oriented treatment. We don't treat people because we want to treat them the way we want. It is because we want to treat people according to how they want to be treated. Okay, so they guide us, they tell us what's going on, they tell us about what's stressing them, how stress started, and that is how we get to treat them. We don't, so patients will always have different backgrounds. So depending on their values and their beliefs and their culture, um, background, that is going to vary from one patient to the other. So, what works in one culture may not be acceptable in another. Okay. So, you might say a word that that you are used to saying because that's your culture, but you be careful because maybe the other culture is not acceptable. Like I gave you an example of the word silly, using the word silly to mean you're funny. So that's exactly what what I'm really talking about. So we have to respect our patients' values and their beliefs so that we can be able to gain or lead to better outcomes and stronger relationships. If a client or a patient believe that you're not respecting their culture or you're ignoring their values and their beliefs when you're treating them and you're trying to impose yours on them, you might not have a strong relationship. As a matter of fact, they might never return to your care. They might go find help somewhere else where they feel valued and respected and listened to. Additionally, different viewpoints, experiences, and problem solving approaches are going to be required when you practice because you need that variation so that you can meet different clientele. You ask them for their viewpoint, you ask your colleagues for their viewpoint, you ask your clients for their viewpoints because you are there to serve other people. What, how they solve their problems. If you want to talk somebody about dietary issues, you want to talk to somebody about their mental health issues, you want to know what their viewpoints are, and how they usually solve their problems. So cultural diversity and understanding cultural diversity, they does enhance our ability to innovate and improve patient care. So when they come to us, we really know what to do, and we value their viewpoints, and we ask them how they maybe what you are thinking that is stressing them is not what is stressing them. How does depression look like? What is the level of stress in their culture, and what level of stress is acceptable, and what level of stress is not acceptable. Because some people, if you might go to countries where people just work under stress, um, you know like in the Western world. I can tell you for sure. All right. So the other thing that we're going to have to define is culture. So what is culture? Culture is defined as a complex system of shared beliefs, values, practices, symbols, languages, customs, rituals, and norms. You might see people that have the same values and have same beliefs, but they don't speak the same language. Or they speak the same language, but they use different symbols to communicate, and because they're from different parts of the country. Like we use symbols in Kenya, we use symbols in America, other people use symbols to mean something different. So you have to understand those, and what norms they have, or what traditions or what rituals, because like in my culture that I grew up in, especially Kikuyu, we do have rituals that usually happen at certain ages of development. Like you finish class 8 if you're a boy, and you go for circumcision. um, and then we do have rituals for weddings, we have rituals for um, even for dowry, and other people might not have that. So when these shared beliefs, values, practices, symbols, languages, customs, rituals, and norms transmitted from one generation to the next within particular group or society, that is obviously referred to as culture. I don't practice a culture that I made up. I practice a culture that was passed to me or passed on to me from other generations, my mom's generation, my grandmother's generation. So we passed that culture, and I'm trying to pass mine to my kiddos, but it's also difficult because they're growing up in a different country, which is another topic in this course that we're going to be talking about that. So according to Nakamura Thomas and other colleagues, they refer to culture as a complex concept that significantly influence clients' experiences, health beliefs, and therapeutic interactions in the field of occupational therapy. So this is specifically a research that was done, and that's how they actually defined culture. Research does emphasize the importance of cultural competence in medical and mental health practice, and it does provide practical insights into incorporating cultural considerations into treatment. The good thing about when you are a college professor, or you teach college, or any other practice, you're required to use research. So it's important when you use research, or when you give definitions or information that you have extracted from different parts, especially if you're writing a paper for this class, always remember to say where that information comes from. It's very important to give people credit, and that's why you mentioned the researcher. So we now know Culture encompasses both tangible and intangible aspects of a society's way of life. So besides the tangible, there are also the intangible aspects. So, for example, we do have art. Sometimes art is tangible, other times it's intangible. If somebody says I'm artistic, what does that mean? Music is not necessarily something tangible because if it's sung, you can't touch that music. But if somebody is dancing, we also have literature, we have religion, we have things like the food or cuisine that people eat, social structures, and everyday's behaviors. So we know that culture is not just things that we can see or even touch. There are other aspects of culture. Okay, so make sure that you're taking notes because it's important just in case you asked a question about culture, whether it is just tangible or intangible in an exam. That would be very important. So, what does culture do in our lives, and why is it important that we know what how culture impacts human beings, especially our patients? So I'm going to talk about four important things that culture does, and first one is that culture shapes our identities, and the second one is culture influences our perceptions of the world or how we perceive the world at large, not just where we live, but also the external, boundaries that, we probably are not living in. Culture guides our interactions with others. Culture also provides a framework for understanding and navigating the social and cultural context. So we're going to start by expounding onto number one, um, what culture does. That culture is one of the primary building blocks of identity. From the time we are born, we know that we are impacted by culture. We get immersed from the moment we are born, we get immersed in our cultural norms. The values. Remember, I told you, like in my culture, when a child is born, women have to do this yelling and shouting. It's called illumination. And they'll say things like, "Ah, di, 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 di." So they'll say five of those for boy, and they'll say four identities for a girl. So those are you're immersed right from birth, because you have been born, and that's how they communicate. A boy has been born, a girl has been born. So when people had those, if there were five, they knew a boy was born. If they were four, they knew that a girl was born in that home. So culture is one of the primary building blocks of our identity, and so, from the moment we get onto this world, we get to be immersed in our cultural norms, our values, the traditions, and beliefs that continue to shape how we see ourselves and how we define who we are. So, these cultural factors will continue to influence everything from our names to our gender roles, our family structures, and even our life goals. Our sense of belonging to a family, a community, a nation, or a particular ethnic group. So, like my ethnic group is Kikuyu. You might be from another ethnic group. If you live in the US, you might be the native, the African American, the Hispanic, the non Hispanic. So, we do have these smaller groups, and we also have the larger groups, so belonging to a nation like Kenya, the US, the Canada, Japan. So these things, our sense of belonging, are also deeply tied to our particular culture. Okay, so if you say you belong to this particular nation, there is a culture that belongs to Kenyans. There is a culture that belongs to Americans. There's a culture. But now, if you go to even the smaller groups, there's more cultures. Um, I want to give you an example. So, in the collectivist cultures, like especially um, in Africa, actually even Asia, individuals often define themselves in relation to their family or social groups. They place very high importance on community and familiar ties. So that's why we talk about community. I belong to this community. We do things in this community. And that's why you see when you go to an African funeral, you might find 1,000 people going to somebody's funeral. In contrast, individualistic cultures such as those in many Western nations, I'm going to give you a very good example, like in the US. They place greater emphasis on personal achievement, independence, and self expression. So most of the times is where you live in an entire neighborhood. You don't know your neighbors. All you know is your house, your kids, your dog, and perhaps your car. Um, you don't live in a community as such. People tend to take care of themselves. So you might have a neighbor whose child died. You will see them wear black and white and they go to a funeral. The next thing you hear is that they buried their child, but nobody told you. Unlike in a community like Kenya, where everybody in the village knows that there is somebody who died, and they will come and they will stay there for many days to comfort the family, to pray, to cook, to do all these things. And you can say that one culture is better than the other. So there are pros and cons for each one of them, the community, the individualistic. So those are cultures, and people know why it is important to them. So it's not your place to say that one is better than the other, because you can't tell your client that because they specialize, or they are socialized in the individualistic culture, that you can change them to become communist. No, because that's not possible. You are not supposed to change your clients. Remember, I started it from the beginning. We do not impose our cultures on them. Okay, so let me ask you a question. How does your cultural background influence your sense of identity? What aspects of your identity do you think are most tied to your culture? Is it your name? Is it the education that you're pursuing? Do you identify yourself as a particular culture? Those are questions for you to ask yourself. Okay. So the other thing that we're going to talk about is that culture influences our perceptions of the world. So to expound on this, culture is always acting as a lens that we see through, which we view and interpret the world around us. So, culture shapes our beliefs, it shapes our attitudes, and it shapes our views, our values, all of which influence how we understand events, social issues, and even other people. So, this cultural filter is going to inform what we consider to be normal, to be right, or ethical, and how we perceive and interpret situations. So, depending on your culture, some people are going to see as breaking a leg as an achievement. Somebody broke their bone, that's an achievement. That means they're very, they're very active, Sometimes, we needed a boy to break the leg. No, I'm kidding. A boy needed to break a leg so that they can be known. They're really, really tough. They can, we hear about cultures where somebody had to go fight with a lion so that they could be allowed to marry a girl. And so that's just a different culture. So those things inform the community about the abilities of that man, that great man that you had to fight with the lion. Maybe some people got killed by the lions. Maybe they were considered cowards because they did not fight with the lion and they did not win. I don't know if I would fight with a lion. And that's different cultures. So I remember when my oldest brother was going through circumcision and what happened. Um, I, they had to go get this, get circumcised. They still do get circumcised, and they are not. There's no um, anesthesia, so they feel the pain, so that they can be men, and they have to do it at the age 14, so that they can just stand there and be firm, and that is they are transitioning to manhood. And pain is celebrated as you know a strength. Kind of confusing, but that's people's culture, and you have to respect that. So, can you imagine somebody who is 14 years old flying all the way to Kenya to be circumcised? Because it does happen because their parents want to keep that culture. So, because they know if they go to America, most likely, the children here are circumcised as babies, and so they need to feel the pain so that they can be important men in that culture. And that's happen. There are obviously some cultures that we condemn, like female genital mutilation. We know that, I really speak against that. So there are some cultures that I know that as far as I teach cultural diversity, that they harm people's health, they harm people's self-esteem, and so I would not support, female genital mutilation. I am against it. Okay, so we do recommend that our clients and our patients, preserve their cultures, but if some cultures are unhealthy, like I'm against domestic violence. I'm very, very vocal when it comes to domestic violence. And I know that there are still some cultures somewhere that believe that men should beat their wives because that's how they discipline them. Again, such cultures that actually, violate other people's human rights, I will not advocate for. So just giving that I have to give that disclaimer so that you don't say that Dr. Eunice say we preserve our culture and we respect other people's culture. If a client comes in and they bring a child who has burns on their bodies because they were transitioning them into manhood, and I will consider that child abuse and I will report it to the authorities because I'm mandated to report child abuse in America in my state. So, yeah, I will report that. So that's not okay. Okay, so we did say that culture helps us to actually filter, and inform us what is normal, what is right, what is ethical, and obviously that depends on everybody's culture and perspective. Okay, so I want to give an example. In some cultures, mental health issues may be seen as sign of spiritual imbalance. You've heard that when people say that they have a mental illness, they will send them to their reverend or their priest to go pray so that those demons can come out. But because of obviously modernization and education and research, we do know that um, there are chemical imbalances that happen in the brain. They need to be attended to medically. Um, while in others, they are understood as medical conditions that require treatment. So, sometimes you have to educate our clients. Obviously, if they come to us, and even though I'm doing therapy, I will ask a client if they want to be treated using the science or their faith or their tradition. So because we are supposed to respect them, somebody might come and say that, I believe that I am a possessed. I need help to get rid of these demons, and I will do my best. If I don't understand my faith, I want to make sure that I refer that client to somebody who understands that perspective so that they can get help. Okay. So perceptions of time vary as well. So in Western cultures, we may value punctuality as a sign of respect. So if your client is coming, or professionalism, if your client is coming to an appointment late, you might think that they are not serious or they are not interested in therapy. If they don't call you on time, if they don't return your call, because we value, that time, you're very, very strict on time. In other places, like, in Kenya, you can wait for your client until, for 2 hours. If they don't show up, they're somewhere. And most of the times about time, it's really because of maybe traffic, means of transportation. People might never get there at the time they say they would. So there's obviously, in other cultures where time may be viewed more flexible, that with an emphasis on human interaction rather than strict schedules. So long as you come, so long as you show up to the party, you're fine. We can you can chat, you can party, you can eat, you can drink until midnight. Or if you go to church, there's some services have to stay all day. And there are some services that you go strictly 1 hour and everyone is out. And people respect time, and there's nothing you can do that. You just respect people's culture. So can you think of a situation where cultural differences shaped um, how two people viewed the same event or issue differently? So that's food for thought for you. So think of a situation where cultural differences shaped to how two people viewed the same event or issue differently. And you get a lot of times um, to see this and to hear this, to listen this, especially when you're doing couple therapy. People that have intermarried, maybe different races, and they will talk about the food. They'll talk about not eating together at the dinner time. Other people just serve food and go eat on the couch. Other people want to serve the food and eat around the table. Those are different cultures, and eating at the table or not eating at the table, one person might say it's being disrespectful and things like that. So there's so many examples I can give you, but I want you to think about some examples that would make you, maybe even your own colleague or classmate in class, you hear somebody yell, you hear somebody shout or cry, you might interpret that as something different from the next person seated next to you because of how they look at that or they perceive that in their own culture. So there's no right or wrong way to interpret that based on your cultural background. Does that make sense? I hope it does, and I hope that if you have any questions, please do make sure that you leave those comments in there so that I can talk about something that I forget to talk about next time. So number three, culture guides our interactions with others. Obviously, we do know that culture guides our interactions with others. And to actually explain that is that cultural norms and values are always going to provide a framework for all social interactions. They actually dictate how we communicate with each other, um, how we show respect, how we form relationships, and even how we resolve conflict. If I have been taught or if I've grown up in a home where people say sorry, I'm gonna say sorry. If you grow up in a home where people don't say sorry to each other, they just, resolve conflict by not talking about it, or if we fight, we just fight and nobody says sorry. That's how that person is going to interact with other people, whether they go to the office, but they also have to learn, because when you become, again, professionally, there's some things that you have to do depending on that work culture, because even though we have our own culture, when you go to our workplaces, we adopt that culture. Not necessarily, not necessarily deserting or diverting or trying to abandon our cultures, but we also have to make sure that we respect the culture of that place. So if people say that you cannot wear jeans, you cannot wear jeans. If people say everybody wear a suit to work, you wear a suit to work. That's another culture. Um, so every culture has its own rules for social behavior, whether it is how to greet someone, how to express disagreement, or even how to give or receive feedback. Understanding these cultural cues is very, very essential, because if your client comes to you and you probably have read their data, you have read their biography, you have talked to them on the phone, and you don't speak their language because maybe you were never, you didn't grow up in that place. What would you do to make sure that that person felt welcome? Maybe try to learn their greeting. Maybe try to know how they greet each other, because it is important, shows respect. So understanding these cultural cues is essential for successful interpersonal communication, especially in medical field and also in mental health, occupational health, and everywhere else you're going to be working after listening to this video. It is important that you know that that does shape how we communicate with each other. Um, you know, in some cultures, making direct eye contact can be considered a sign of confidence and honesty. I learned that very quickly when I came to the US. I kid you not. I grew up knowing that I'm not supposed to look at it at an adult directly into their eyes. And then I come to the US. If you don't look people into the eye, they're gonna think you're lying. On the other hand, if you look at people in their eye, especially in Africa, we were told it's disrespect, especially if they are older. Like looking into your mom's eyes, you're disrespecting them. It's like looking at a little kid. So that's what I'm saying. In some cultures, making direct eye contact is a sign of confidence and honesty, while in others it may be considered disrespectful or confrontational. So imagine fighting your parents because you're looking at them. Why are you looking at me like that? You're disrespecting me. And you fly into another country like America and you're like, why are you not looking into my eyes? Because you're not honest, you're not confident. So you might not actually get that job because you didn't look into them in their eyes, because they believe that you're hiding something. Of course, this is another culture shock. Okay. Um, so communication styles also vary. So there are some that we call high context cultures. So, for example, Kenya or even Japanese, actually, people. I grew up around. Not grew up. I worked around people from Japan, when I worked at the university, Jomo Kenyatta University, because they were always there and because they funded the university. So I had a lot of colleagues that were Japanese. So I did learn a lot about these high context cultures. So they rely heavily on indirect communication, where much is implied rather than stated outright. Okay. So my mother, my late mother, my sweet late mother, rest in peace, mom, just needed to look at you and you knew what you're supposed to do. So if she comes home and she looks at you and she looks at the sink or the dishes, She's telling you, I am looking at you because you should have washed those dishes. Okay? I'm looking at you because you have not sat appropriately. I'm looking at you because you are fighting with your brother and you need to stop now. So that's high context. Much is implied and less is stated, So like that rule when adults get into the house, your children, you are supposed to get up and go. Nobody told you to do that, but you just know you're supposed to do that because why? It's implied. It was not stated. Low context cultures, such as the US or Germany, tend to favor direct. So sometimes this can also be considered a conflict, you know, explicit communication. Somebody says, I don't like you. I don't like you. I don't need your help. I am okay. Even your children will tell you, I am okay. I don't want it. We didn't say that to our parents when we were growing up, but a kid in America can look at you and tell you, no, thank you. I don't need help. So, yeah, that's what we're talking about, low. So, I hope you get the difference. So, think of a time when you did interact with someone. It could be your roommate, it could be your girlfriend, it could be your wife from a different culture. What were some of the differences in communication styles or social norms that you noticed? You noticed, okay? So yeah, that's what you're talking about. And when you say that culture guides our interactions with others, that's what we're talking about. Okay. So the final one is the framework to understand social and cultural context. So what are we saying here? What we're saying is that culture offers us a mental map that helps us to navigate the complexities of this world because it includes societal structures, it includes relationships, and even the roles we play within our communities. That is, we have been socialized to know what our role is. When a child is born, you start getting taught these things. I remember I was a little girl when my grandmother would tell me that this is how you wash clothes for your husband. This I didn't even have a husband. I was probably only 6 years. I was learning to wash clothes, and she will tell me this is how you fetch water, this is how you cook for your husband. And I did not even have a husband. So you socialize so that you can know how what your roles are and how to interact with people, and even you're told how to respect a husband you didn't even have. So it defines what is acceptable behavior, what is considered success or failure, and how to interact within various so, social contexts such as education, healthcare, and even business. Culture also informs our sense of morality, ethics, and the law. It is a culture that tells us we don't take other people's things without permission. We were socialized in the home. Before we even went out there and we were told by our teachers, our parents had already told us, you don't take other people's things without permission. That's considered stealing and you can get in trouble. You respect the elders. So even if you went into a place where your parents were not there and you found elders, you knew that you needed to respect them because you had been socialized what is moral and what is not moral. Okay. So um so I want to give some examples. Like again, when I refer to Western culture, so the legal system is based on individual rights and responsibilities. And I can tell you that every time I have to see my client, the first thing I start by is stating their rights and their responsibilities. In other countries like Kenya or Africa, I mean, when you go to African countries, we really tend to think about justice, which is often based on communal harmony and reconciliation rather than punishment. So we want people to get along. We want people to, to help each other. We want people to come together if somebody gets sick and we help them. So it is really about that. We want people to live in harmony. Culture also influences professional behavior. For instance, of in healthcare, understanding a patient's cultural background can really, really, really help um, that uh, professional to provide better care. So, in a more respectful care that is going to align with the patient's beliefs and practices. And this is something that I started by saying from the beginning. Even though we are professionals and we have been trained, we can force people to take medication. We cannot force people to stay in therapy because we have been trained. It's we start having an understanding of their culture, and then we offer what we have and we give them the right to choose. How has your cultural background shaped your understanding of social rules and expectations? So that's the other question. How has your cultural background shaped your understanding of social rules and expectations? For example, how does your culture define what is success and what is failure? You know, do you belong to a culture where people believe that buying a car is considered a success? Graduating and getting your degree is considered success? Maybe not being able to buy a car is being considered failure. So all these things are shaped by culture, but I hope that you also know that even when you don't have a car and when you don't have a house, and when you don't have a degree, you have some degree of success because you're still living, you're still kicking, and you're continuing to thrive regardless of those things. So I do know that there are some cultures that define success based on their education, based on the number of cars they have, personal cars, based on their businesses, based on the amount of money in their account. All right. So, food of thought. So there's some questions that I would just throw to to my listeners. So, do you speak more than two languages? Because language is often one of the most is often one of the most obvious aspects of cultural diversity. I might not talk a lot, but culture, language alone, and I'm not just talking about who speaks Swahili and who speaks English and who doesn't speak English. Language itself has a lot of variations. And it is just the tip of the iceberg. Have you ever lived outside your country? Have you ever lived outside Kenya? Even if it's for a short time. And I'm sure you experience a lot of cultural shock just because you traveled. You might have just traveled within the county or outside the county. You might have, traveled from Kenya to Tanzania. You might have traveled from one state to the other, but the differences, even in language, they are huge. I mean, I speak Kenyan English or British English, and people know that don't speak. I'm not from America, and I've lived in the US for 20 years, and I still speak English. Okay, that is somebody in Oklahoma who is a native Oklahoman. When I go to Texas, sometimes I don't even understand the English because they have an accent, and they are speaking English, and they're Americans that have lived in America for all their lives, but they have a different accent. So language varies a lot. Language alone does vary a lot. So living abroad yes, it does expose us to different cultural practices, but we don't even need to travel far to experience cultural diversity. Just go to your neighbor's house. Some people they use the same basin that they use for bathing to wash the dishes. You don't have to live in a different state or a different um, county or ethnic group to know that there's a lot of cultural diversity. Who celebrates a holiday or a festival that is not widely celebrated in your country, whether you're in Kenya, whether you're in America, whether you're in Canada? Some people do have their own made up holidays. Maybe they celebrate the day their pet died. Maybe they celebrate the day um, their grandmother died. Those are different celebrations. They call them holidays and they are festivals. Sometimes they even have huge, huge, huge festivals. We have Thanksgiving, we have Halloween, we have Easter, we have all sorts, celebrations. And even in Kenya, we do have dowry. We have, which is called Rolasho, and it's very huge. Now we have parental blessings. Now we have weddings. We have funerals. We have all sorts of celebrations. That is besides the public holidays and the faith or Christian holidays or Muslim holidays, and Hindus have different holidays. So our traditions and celebrations reflect our values, which can be important to consider in healthcare or even mental health, and any other places where we are working with clients, especially when treating patients. When we schedule appointments, we have to also consider other people's culture so that we can understand whether those people will be able to come. Because if you're in Kenya or anywhere else that the Islamic community is huge, and you're trying to schedule appointments at 6, or at their prayer time or 1 o'clock, or you have to consider those things, because their culture is going to impact your relationship and whether they're going to attend your appointment or not. Some people don't work on Sunday. Christians. There's some Christians that will not work on Sunday, whether it is an emergency call, they just turn off their phone, and that's their culture. There's some clients that will not come to see on Saturday because Saturday is their Sabbath. So understanding patients' dietary restrictions is also very, very important. That's culture too. You will not give somebody who doesn't eat pork a supplement, that has pork. So those are very, very important. That's very important information to know. So what is cultural diversity? Cultural diversity, and I'm going to go through this very quickly because I didn't intend to teach for an hour for this first lesson. Um, so, how do we define cultural diversity? Cultural diversity is the existence of a variety of cultural or ethnic groups within a society. Now, you know what cultural diversity, after all that introduction and definition of what is culture, what are values and things like that. Now you know that cultural diversity is the existence of a variety of cultural and ethnic groups within a society. Cultural diversity is all around healthcare, not just healthcare, anywhere else that more than one person are going to interact. Every patient brings their own background, traditions, and values. And diversity influences patients' views on health and illness and treatment. That feels like a little bit of repeat, but it's okay. I'm gonna have copied that. Everywhere in the world, we interact with numerous ethnic groups, and the growing global community adds even more layers of diversity. So, I want to ask you, how do you think cultural diversity has shaped the healthcare environment around the world? Of course, that would be a topic, a class by itself. Now, this one would just be a course that I would teach for a whole semester or for a whole year to answer this question. How do I think cultural diversity has shaped the healthcare environment around the world? And especially today, very, very much has really shaped the healthcare world in a very huge way. We didn't know that much until COVID came. So there's a lot of impact on healthcare environment um, based on cultural diversity. So the other things that we're going to be talking about throughout this class is cultural competence. So where is the understanding, communicating with, and effectively interacting with people across cultures? So cultural competence isn't just about knowing another culture. It is the ability to adjust your approach to meet your patients where they are. So you have the understanding. You can be able to communicate effectively and you can be able to interact with people from different cultures and you're respecting them because you need to gain some knowledge. That's what gives you cultural competence. So it is not just knowing another culture, it is also the ability to adjust your approach to meet your patients where they are. So we don't ask our clients to meet us where we are. We meet the clients where they are. We meet our patients where they are. That's what is all about competence. That's what makes us competent employees or competent healthcare workers. It is an ongoing process that includes self awareness. You have to have an open mind and you do have to have a commitment to learn. I learn constantly about different cultures. And even sometimes I will research, I'll read research. What does research say? Especially there's a lot of research that is surrounding healthcare and mental health. Obviously that has been done. So it's because we are evidence based and I want to read about it. When you're treating people of different cultural backgrounds, what is going to make them have a strong relationship with you? What is going to make them trust you? What is going to make them come back to you? What is going to make them open up to you? What's going to make them succeed in therapy or in the treatment that you're giving them? That all that has been researched, and there's research out there for you to continue learning. That's why you have to have an open mind and you be committed to learning. And this learning this is an example of learning. Being in this class or watching this video, you're learning and educating yourself on how to take care of your clients from different cultures. We don't want to treat people as if we were all brought up in the same house. And even if you were all brought up in the same house, even siblings do have their preferences. So we consider everybody to have their own culture. So, can you think of an example where cultural competence might affect how a patient responds to treatment? I want you to be thinking about these questions and I want you to be writing them at the end of your notes because that's a food for thought. And since I don't want to go over this time, I'm going to end here and continue next time. Okay, so this is going to be the last slide. Cultural competence, we said it's understanding and respecting diversity, personal beliefs, individual values, assumptions, and biases that are, shaped by experiences, the experiences that we have gone through. Positive influence provides ethical foundation and sense of purpose. Potential bias that can lead to objectivity issues and affect quality of care, especially when we don't want to value other people's culture. There is potential bias. So instead of remaining objective, we are subjective. So we see people and we become judgmental because they are from another culture. Self awareness, crucial for recognizing and managing our personal beliefs. So you have to be self aware. So cultural competence does include self awareness. Just knowing that you have biases, just knowing that you are a human being and you can make errors and you can try to see that your culture is more superior than the other person's just because they eat different kind of food and they wear different clothes doesn't make them more inferior than you. Okay, so that is the end. And of course, these are some of the references. And I will see you next time. So please like my video, share my video, um, comment, and subscribe to my channel. I thank you for watching.